and people who hear her speak feel inspired and hopeful. So you're in for a treat, and I honestly don't think there's anything she can't do. So kind of a big warm round of applause for Sonia.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming up. When I was invited for Creative Mornings and I heard it happens at 8:30 in the morning, I was like, okay. So I am well impressed. Thank you for being here and thank you for showing up. And hopefully in half an hour, we will have some inspiration coming from me or otherwise. But yeah, I titled my talk, When the World Dims, Radical Imagination as a Glimmer of Hope. I will elaborate on that, but I thought it is January. Vibes are not vibing, really. If we look outside, it's not the prime time for many of us, I don't think. So let's hope that we can change that this morning with a little bit of a story. Ooh, I will get there. Perfect. I happen to have one of the best jobs in the world. I am a production coordinator for high-end TV. I help create worlds that don't exist for a living and make money with that, which is pretty awesome, I think. I think that's something really special about 200, 300 people coming together for a production of a TV show in Bristol, in Cardiff, wherever, and just making something from scratch, something that doesn't exist. And we build sets, we make incredible things happen, and I happen to have a small part in that as a coordinator. Other things that I am professionally, I have set up a powerhouse talent management agency. This is for Bristol and beyond, but mostly trying to prove to people that we have so much talent here on our home turf in the Southwest, and just connecting that talent with all of those amazing opportunities. So when we make those shows in Bristol and Cardiff and anywhere else, we don't just bring people from far away, i.e. London, but we have so many amazing people here, as I can see right in front of me right now. Sometimes I'm an indie film producer. Some other times I work with talented teenagers from all around the world in the US. And I've also got a Master of Science in Humanitarianism, Conflict and Development. So that's just a little bit about me. I will make friends with this clicker. By the end of it, we're lovely. And one thing that I think is that the world has enough problems, and I really love it when people and ideas come in together and have some solutions. I'm like, I don't want to hear, there's enough narratives of crisis going on there, but I'm interested in, okay, what did we do about that? How was this problem solved? In the UK, outside of the UK, I'm just very interested in solutions. I like to make things happen, and I do not like to surrender to despair. So I always ask myself that question, what can inspire me? Where can I find it? And one of the earliest things I remember very vividly was reading the US Declaration of Independence for the first time. And I am Polish of origin, so the history of my country is full of oppression, occupation, those narratives of not necessarily most inspiring. And then I remember seeing for the first time that in Declaration of Independence, which was, 1776, unalienable rights, blah, 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 and the pursuit of happiness. And I was like, this is a legal document that was such a strange and foreign thought to me, that you can demand that legally, that we all have the right to pursue our own happiness. And that's why I put it here, because I was like, that is an example of kind of something really radical to me at the time to read it for the first time, that this can be a thing, that we can demand that and include it in paperwork. And one of the things that is related to my work and all aspects of my work is stories. And I think stories have a really strong power to hold us and to inspire us or to bring us down, and what stories we surround ourselves with really matters. So yeah, I always ask myself, what are the stories I enjoy? What is it about them? And what stories do I enjoy telling? And usually those stories are ones of grassroots people going against the tide, trying something new, kind of against all odds. Those are the stories I enjoy. And the reason it matters is because this depends, on that, we have so much dependency on the stories we surround ourselves with. If all you do is watch news on a 24-hour channels on TV, how are you gonna, it's so easy to succumb to narratives of crisis. And I think this is book by Yuval Noah Harari, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And in that book, he explores that the main thing that distinguishes us from any other species is that we can do things because of a story we've heard. We can go to war, we can make peace, we can come together, we can go on the moon, we can have weekends, and all of those are stories we subscribe to one way or another. And every successful person you know, every person you can't stand, consciously or subconsciously, they choose to tell themselves a story one way or another. And language plays a big part of that. We can invent stories about things that don't exist. The reason we go to war, politics, beliefs, religion, all of those things separates us from any other species. And in that sense, storytelling is our superpower that sets us apart from other species. Which also makes us able to cooperate in very large numbers. Thank you. We will get there. There we go. So in my job as a production coordinator, I make worlds that don't exist for a living, but then I also live in a world that does exist with all of its flaws. And that's a part of me that inspired me to do my master's in humanitarianism, conflict and development, because it keeps me grounded. Whilst I deal with all the entitlement and privilege, I also want to know what's happening in the world, but I don't want to let it make me feel undone. I want it to help me feel inspired and see some solutions. And that's also why I work with youth, because the way 15-year-olds want to change the world is absolutely outstanding. The ideas they have, the inspiration they have. And in my summer camp in the US, where I work with a lot of young people, I've learned about something called radical imagination. This is a drawing by yours truly. I'm very proud of that. I think this is how we are born into this world. This is the you when you're 3 years old, 4 years old, somebody asks you, what do you want to do? You say, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a singer, I don't care what stops me, I'm going to get there. And this is what happens when we get to adulthood. And those layers can be our family upbringing, can be our schooling, can be our professional limitations, not being able to find a job perhaps. All of those layers, we start wearing them, thinking, oh, it just has to be that way, it just kind of happened to me. And then we start to get slightly confused. And radical imagination, to me, is a framework that can be helpful in untangling that, removing all of those layers and coming back to that state when you can think, ooh, I really want to do this crazy thing. And then you're like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. There we go. Ooh, too far, too far. So radical imagination is a framework that comes from activism, and it transforms what is into what if. It's a driver for social change. And it is our ability to imagine the world, life, and social institutions not as they are, but as they might otherwise be. It is the courage and intelligence to recognize that world can and should be changed. It's not just about dreaming of different futures. It's about bringing those possibilities back from the future to work on the present, to inspire actions, come up with solutions, and see where we can get. And this framework comes from most oppressed communities, particularly Black rights movement in the US, and from communities that suffer from the most oppression and exploitation. And it's often stunted and diluted in communities that enjoy greatest privileges. And one thing that I get a bit of a rush and I get a bit like, is when I hear young people say, oh, it doesn't matter, no one cares, and there's this sense of like, ooh, you know, why vote, why do things? Because that is also a privilege to be able to not care. When people tell me I don't care about politics, for example, or I don't care about my neighborhood, it's just the way things are. I'm like, ooh, okay, inhale, Sonia, inhale and exhale, because yeah, radical imagination does not get stuck in the status quo. It requires us to unlearn what we've been taught by recognizing that our education is controlled by entities of power. And it can be government, it can be media, it can be school systems, it can be entertainment, the stories we surround ourselves with. And all of these powers have led us into believing that the way things are right now is the only way. Now, you all come here, Bristol adjacent or living in Bristol. Bristol is one of those cities that constantly goes against status quo. And I'm so proud to be living in Bristol, and I think that city constantly shows people that there are different worlds, they are possible, and we can get there. And this, if you think about it, this isn't that radical, actually. That's how we got weekends. This is how women got the right to vote. Everything we can think of that happened in the past is an example of someone radically imagining that we can do differently, that we can do better, human rights maybe, like there's so many examples. And basically any change that happens, any movement or source for good or evil requires radical imagination. Examples. What is that? That is a radical imagination example in practice. I've been in Bristol for the past 11 years, and as long as I've been here, there's been conversations. And then one day conversations turned into radical action. Another example, Lima Bowie. Lima Bowie is a Liberian peace activist, and she got Nobel Peace Prize. And I had the pleasure of meeting her in person. And when you go online, I think it says she led marches and rallies while also coordinating strikes and sit-ins for Liberian women. One thing this doesn't mention, because it's kind of watered-down version, is one of the things she suggested during Liberian civil war. And again, you can think, what can women do when men go to war? Lima Bowie went on sex strike and encouraged women to go on sex strike as well in Liberia, so that no one get sex till the war is over. And if that isn't radical imagination, she got a Nobel Peace Prize for that, guys. This is radical imagination in practice. More examples. Breakdancing Jesus in Bristol. Who remembers that? This used to be by the canteen. Queuing in lots of different Asian countries. I think this photo is from Thailand. But what if we didn't have to stand in a queue? What if we could just sit and chill? We know who's next. Why do we queue? I've asked a nation that loves to queue. Radical imagination. Who knows where is that? That's recent. That's Bristol. Luke Jerram's installation in Noel Jubilee swimming pool. Very cool. Who remembers that? Yeah. What is that? Can someone tell me? Park Street water slip and slide, right, also by artist Luke Jerram. What happened if we just turned Park Street into one giant slide? This is from 2010, and it did happen. Examples of radical imagination. Now, why should you care? Radical means from the root, big changes, but that's not big in terms of let's overthrow the government tomorrow, although, but in terms of your scope of your ideas. You don't have to be radical to flex your radical imagination muscle and imagine a different future. Because everyday activism, whether that's your personal activism about your life and how you want to lead it, or whether that's about how you shape your community, is not about being on the front line. It's not necessarily about protesting. It's like everyone will have their own way to exercise this muscle. Maybe the most radical thing is to decide that you will be happy and will have a beautiful life. How about that? And I love how there's a campaign against living miserably. This is an organization, I think a charity, and I just love that as a radical concept of like, we could just all come together and be against living miserably. What a concept, I love that. You may not be sold on the idea of like that interacting with politics in the place where you live and how you want to do it. But one thing is, if you don't imagine it for yourself in your neighborhood, someone else will. And I think that's one of the reasons why you should care, because without radical imagination, there would be no countries, no borders, no wars, no schools, no hospitals, no cars, no planes, no computers, because all of those ideas started with a thought. And if you ask people what do they want, and if we don't do it radically, if we don't do it big and from the root, the issue we have is if you ask people, oh, what would you want to happen? And they're like, oh, whatever. And this is best expressed in this quote by John McNeice. There is a problem trying to figure out what people want by canvassing them. If Henry Ford canvassed people on whether or not he should build a motor car, they would probably tell him what they wanted was a faster horse. And that is why you need a radical imagination to come up, kind of think bigger, dream bigger with that. And that is a muscle that takes practice to rediscover and redevelop, because coming back to the most beautiful drawing I have ever made, we have it when we're born, and then something happens. Those layers get put onto us. And it is a practice, it is a muscle to kind of first identify the layers, what is stopping and what is affecting my radical imagination muscle right now, and then slowly trying to shed them, take them off, and kind of see what can I do to come back to this state, whatever that means for you. And for each one of us, this will be very different. Yeah. How does that relate to you? It might not at all. But what you could do today is think of stories that inspire you and make you feel alive. What films, what social media content gives you that feeling? Is it cats? Is it activism? Is it hope? What kind of content is the content you're into? And to me personally, radical imagination is the most powerful tool of resistance, because you can't be what you can't see, but you can be what you can imagine. And I think that's where it starts. If it starts here, if we imagine it here, then we can do amazing things. And only if we look for stories, curious and weird, beautiful and fun, we can then realize what power they hold and use that. And if you think about your favorite shows, someone thought, this is going to be an amazing story, and they charmed you with that story. They were like, oh, come on in, have a look, be inspired. And we just need to think about what can we do about that in our real lives outside of those stories. And stories can transform despair into hope. They can make us head in the right direction. And remember, we are the only species on the planet that can do that. And what stories we choose to fill our hearts with will have long-lasting consequences on our life. And for me, that is my crusoe. That's my glimmer of hope when things get hard, in January, in winter. And I hope sharing that with you today helps. Thank you. Here's some contacts. I'll be here afterwards. I'm reachable, and here's things. And one more thing is, if you can just take a photo. If something I said today resonated, this is homework. So if you're like, where do I take this next? Here's some questions to help you dig it out. Ooh, what am I radically thinking about right now? So 2 months ago, I've started my own talent agency, and I am radically thinking about what are my blind spots? Who am I not kind of reaching out to? And I'm thinking about how do I connect Bristol-based talent to Bristol-based opportunities and outside, and like all over UK? And how will I know I have helped those people? But I also, it's important for me to include people I take on board in the process. So I ask people, my potential clients, how will you know in a year from now that having an agent has helped you? And then that opens kind of what do I actually want? Why am I actually reaching out to this person? So that's one thing I'm radically imagining. And another thing is I just bought a house and took a mortgage. There's nothing more radical than taking a mortgage, I think. I'm like, for the next 35 years, every month, whether my house stands and is still there after those 35 years. That's some radical thinking, and they've done it for me. That system, that's a layer. That system was there. I didn't invent it. So yeah.